In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Like Alexander and his army, I'm venturing into hostile and challenging territory to find a trace of one extraordinary city.
Oh, wow.
Alexander is reputed to have founded beside the river Oxus.
Well, I'm actually standing in a Greek amphitheatre. And in 250 BC, Greek plays were being performed here to crowds of up to 5,000 people.
I'm going to explore a series of ruins that may hold the key, both to Alexander's lost city and to an astonishing civilization that flowered here thousands of years before the Greeks arrived. This is the story of how the Greeks built a dazzling eastern capital in a remote corner of Afghanistan, the city of Lady Moon. Alexander the Great is the iconic hero of ancient Greece. In a series of victories, Alexander crushed his Persian enemy, Darius III, and claimed for himself the title of Emperor of the East. But Alexander's conquest in Central Asia may not have been all it appears. I want to separate the fact from the fiction. As Alexander pushed his way deeper into Persian territory, he came up against intense resistance. In the kingdoms of Bactria and Sogdia, local tribes fought his army in pitched battles every step of the way. It took all the Greeks' resources just to garrison the territory they claimed. Legend has it, Alexander founded as many as 16 cities in Central Asia alone. But today, we know that more than half of these cities were already established when Alexander arrived. Settlements Alexander renamed, and little else. There's only one place we know for sure was built by Alexander. And archaeologists believe all he constructed here was a wooden fort. The rest of his cities have never been found. If I can find a trace of just one ancient metropolis built at Alexander's command, it would mean that there is some truth behind the legend. And there's one fabled city upon the Oxus River that I want to find. I'm following the tracks of Alexander into Afghanistan. Today, this region is a desert covered with rutted sand tracks that lead everywhere and nowhere. I've met up with my driver Habib and our guide Reza. We're searching for one of Alexander's river crossing points, but we're already lost.
Here we are, Stan. And hopefully these guys are going to know where the crossing is.
Salam alaikum.
We've come down here and we're just there.
The village?
Yeah. And see, it says it crosses here, but no.
شهر تفهم میره باز دوسن میریم دو طرف بریم دو جا تا میشه. بله.
Well, life's going to get very interesting. We don't even know if we can cross the river.
We're heading west to find the ancient ruin of Kaya Zal. It sits upon the confluence of the Oxus and its largest tributary, the Kunduz River. This was once a strategic defence post in the land of Bactria, and there's a chance this could be the place Alexander built his famous city, Alexandria on the Oxus. These desert lands are totally unpredictable, and a sandstorm is fast approaching.
Well, we've made the river and the boat's here, but we've now got this big sandstorm. So it's hard to say what's going to happen. We'll probably get through, but it means it's going to get dark really quick.
The ruins of Kaya Zal lie out on the edge of this delta, and it hasn't been explored by outsiders for decades. Nowadays, this is a Taliban problem area, and the crossing is guarded by local police. But our immediate problem isn't the Taliban, it's getting across. These waterways are in a constant state of flux as the river level slowly drops throughout the year, then floods every spring, cutting the villages of the delta off from the rest of the country. Over 2,300 years ago, the crossing would have been almost exactly the same for Alexander and his 55,000 strong army. On their 3-year-long campaign through Central Asia, they braved this harsh, constantly changing environment and hostile tribes. Today, in the heart of the Kunduz Delta are many villages with Taliban sympathies.
From Australia.
از استرالیا اومدن.
Very long way.
استرالیا.
Australia.
We're escorted to the police post and an audience with the local commander. He's expecting us, but he's got no idea why a foreigner has come out here. And it takes a bit of explaining.
You can tell them this is a program you can get. I don't know if they know Google.
They?
Yeah, these guys.
They know, they don't know.
Okay. To explain what this is not military. Okay?
Yeah.
You can, on your computer, you can have this program,
Yeah.
and it's made up of lots of different satellites, and we can zoom down. But you can explain it to them, how I have this photo.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Because they might be wondering why. They probably think I'm a spy, you see, and that's all it is. It's just a printout from Google Earth.
Yeah.
But here, this is pretty revolutionary, to be able to look in on a place like this. So I'm just wanting to reassure them that I'm not a spy.
در واقع مردم تشویق کنیم که بیاین اینجا ببینن. مردمای دیگر تشویق کنیم بیاین جای شما رو ببینن.
در استقامت پر میکنیم میگن که راتی که بود کدام خدمتی که بود ما در خدمتتون هستیم.
Eventually, we gain the commander's trust and get the all clear to explore Kaya Zal. Habib, our driver, makes a few adjustments just to keep at least some of the dust out of the engine. Out here, breakdowns are not an option. From a distance, Kayazal seems little more than just another flat-top hill beside the ancient Kunduz River. It's not until you reach the first line of battlements that you start to get an idea of the size of Kayazal. Its walls are more than 6 kilometres long. The ruins of a fortified citadel, or arg, are clear to see.
Well, this place is enormous. Even after the rivers actually come through here and gouged out part of the fortifications, you can see that it really would have repelled all comers. But the riddle is, who built it? What it's pointing to is that the Greeks built it. These huge great squares, and then this enormous arg that would have sat up above here.
This site is so remote and hard to reach, it has never been excavated. So much of its story remains a mystery. Alexander's biographers tell us that more than 2,000 years ago, the Oxus and its tributary, the Kunduz, joined here and then parted again. Looking out, it's clear to see that even today only a narrow neck of sand separates the Kunduz from the Oxus. So Kayazal was strategically built to keep watch over the two rivers, the delta and its approaches.
Experience the past like never before with History Hit's award-winning original documentaries and ad-free podcasts with our expert historians like Dan Snow, Susanna Lipscomb, Lucy Worsley, Mary Beard, Tristan Hughes and myself, Matt Lewis. Sign up for an exclusive discount using the link in the description and embark on your historical journey from the wonders of ancient Egypt and the life of Anne Boleyn to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte and the discovery of Shackleton's Endurance. Get history wherever, whenever, exclusively on History Hit.
But its layout and design suggest that this was once a bastioned Greek city. Walking across these ruins, I really get a sense of Alexander being here.
You know, one of the things about climbing over places like this is you're actually climbing through history. And as you move around, you could think back to what it would have been like living on this river. Perhaps as a Greek, stationed here for the rest of your life. I don't know if it would have been soul-destroying or uplifting. It was a totally different world for them and me.
Greek sources tell us, in the spring of 328 BC, Alexander's armies crossed the Kunduz and then the Oxus to try and put down a local rebellion. And the only place it's possible to cross the two rivers is right here at the ancient ford of Kayazal. This could be Alexander's city, but there's a problem. The surface pottery only dates back to a time 400 years after the arrival of Alexander.
Yeah, I think so. It's for putting the wheat and rice.
And the big pieces.
Yeah, very good.
The truth about Kayazal's origins must lie in the layers of archaeology deep beneath this citadel's massive foundations. I can't be sure if this was Alexandria on the Oxus, but there's no doubt that he would have left soldiers here to man this strategic passage and secure his supply route. Control of vantage points like this was the key to Alexander's success. From here, he took the fight north across the rivers, to suppress the fiercely independent Bactrian and Sogdian tribes. We're told Alexander had a fearsome army. There were 9 infantry units, amongst them thousands of archers and shield bearers, accompanied by over 4,000 cavalry. But to truly crush all resistance, he would have to do more than win battles. He had to maintain control of trade routes and waterways. For the Greek troops left behind to garrison local towns and villages, life would have been similar to that of these Afghan policemen today.
That's very good.
Welcome. Welcome to Khalazar.
Thanks. Hello.
We're staying in their barracks for the night.
Oh, this is great. This is fine. Yeah.
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 So,
We'll get the bag.
The policemen are not from around here. They're recruited from other parts of the country for a very good reason. Here, the law of the land is still dominated by tribal politics. It would be impossible for a local not to be drawn in to a web of intrigue and corruption. So the police are outsiders in this community, just like Alexander's men 2,300 years ago. For the Greeks, it would have been a hand-to-mouth experience, stationed here at the end of their known world. Just a small unit, a daunting 4,000 kilometres from their Mediterranean homeland. They had no choice but to make alliances with Bactrian and Persian chieftains. And the two cultures that had once clashed began to mix. So far, we've followed the route of Alexander's army to Kayazal. But I'm not sure that this little-known ruin could ever have been more than just a Greek garrison in Alexander's time. Now, I want to explore a place that's far more famous. It's a site called Ai-Hanum, an Arabic name meaning the city of Lady Moon. Ai-Hanum is the only ancient Greek metropolis ever discovered in Central Asia. It's a place many believe to be Alexandria on the Oxus, and it's right on the Afghan-Tajik border. After a secure night at the police barracks, we're back on the move. I've met up with Jamshid, a local guide.
It's just so green. I hadn't expected it to be so fertile here.
Well, this is the time that, people are working on their fields, and they just start growing melon, watermelon.
Our next challenge is a formidable one. Ai-Hanum is right in the forbidden military border zone. It's so highly protected, we first have to stop at the nearby city of Talakan to get special permission from the governor of the province.
Good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
And we're going to the areas that you feel. He said that then if you have any problem, call me.
Right?
Yeah.
The governor has actually had to go off. He's got a problem in a different part of the province. But he's told Jamshid that we can go up, but if we have a problem, then we should come back here and have tea with him. Trouble is, that's hours away. So we'll have to wing it a bit. We're going to get a letter of permission. We'll see how we go.
The wheels of bureaucracy do turn, but at a leisurely Afghan pace. This is one part of my journey that Alexander definitely wouldn't have had to do. It seems to be taking forever. So I head outside for a stroll through the Talokan markets. Sadly, few outsiders ever have a chance to experience everyday life like this. The threat of attack on Westerners makes it almost impossible. The ancient Greeks were among the first Westerners to come here. They stood out from the crowd, just like me.
So what do we have?
Rice and then the raisin and some meat.
When he conquered Bactria, it's said that Alexander adopted Persian dress and acted out local customs to ensure his leadership was accepted.
Okay, I've got our.
Well done.
Bunch
We
of
need all
papers.
these?
Yes, we need all places you're traveling. We need one paper for the people.
But so for the police and for the government.
Police, with
Okay.
government.
Okay, well done.
Like Alexander, we're heading north to the rugged terrain of Ai Hanum. This is one of the poorest regions of Afghanistan. In this arid landscape, only the river valleys can sustain life. But we hit a major obstacle. The bridge across the river has been out since heavy floods almost a year ago. We've no option but to head downstream to find another way across. Just getting through the mud to the crossing point is a trial in itself. Here the villagers have hit upon a cunning scam. They intentionally keep the road muddy to bog vehicles, then charge to help them out. And since we're foreigners, the price goes up from $5 to $60. I guess we should have brought our own donkeys. We get hooked up to the tractor, and it looks like we'll be across in no time. But we don't get very far for our money. So we resort to Plan B. The tractor driver guides us through, and some locals lend a hand. Jamshid's off-road driving skills get us safely back onto dry land.
travelling almost all day, done about 3 different police checks, drunk a lot of green tea waiting for our permits, but we're finally here. This is Ai Hanum, and it's absolutely vast. We haven't had a look at it yet, but it's a whole mountaintop. It just looks mind-blowing.
The site was officially discovered by the Afghan king Muhammad Zahir Shah during a hunting expedition in 1961. And when French archaeologists began excavating, they found a sensational series of ruins that were unlike anything else in Central Asia. We set up camp above the Oxus next to the border post. It's quite likely that a division of Alexander's army set up camp right here too. This would have been a strategic position guarding the river crossing into Sogdia. Across the river is Tajikistan. Ever since the Soviet occupation in the 1980s, this has been one of the most heavily defended borders in Asia. Next morning, we start to explore what remains of the city of Ai Hanum. The first thing we spot are the scars in the earth, made not by ancient hands, but treasure hunters and modern conflict. In 2001, this region was the front line between the Afghan Northern Alliance and the Taliban. Trenches and tank dugouts are still clear to see. The Taliban never succeeded in taking northeastern Afghanistan. Ai Hanum's ancient defences were too formidable. These ramparts seem just as impenetrable today as they would have been in ancient times. It looks like a barren borderland, but 2,000 years ago, this was a huge classical city. If you look closely, there's the imprint of magnificent structures all around.
Well, I'm actually standing in a Greek amphitheatre. And in 250 BC, Greek plays were being performed here to crowds of up to 5,000 people. Behind me is what remains of Ai Hanum, Lady Moon, a Greek city 4,000 kilometres from Athens. It's astonishing to think that all the way out here in Afghanistan, this was a Greek settlement. Here people would gather to be entertained, as traditional Greek comedies and Olympian games were played out in this immense amphitheatre. At its peak, 150 years after Alexander, Ai Hanum would have had all the riches and infrastructure you'd find in the greatest Greek cities of Mediterranean Europe. It stretched along the river for over 2 kilometres. There could have been about 10,000 people living here. Many were Greek colonists, and here they built a place that reinforced their Greek origins. Walking through the city gates, it would have been an awesome sight. Beyond the ramshackle dwellings and large stately homes was a huge waterside palace. It was a monumental statement of Greek power in Bactria. As well as being the residence of the royal dynasty, this palace was a centre for local administration. Further along the riverside was one of the largest gymnasiums of antiquity. Citizens of Ai Hanum came here to exercise, in particular soldiers. Inside, they trained for public games. Competing against each other in wrestling and archery kept them in a state of constant readiness for battle.
The temples of Ai-Hanum reveal that in this new city there was a fusion of Eastern and Western beliefs. Some were dedicated to ancient Greek gods, but others, like this Persian-style temple, likely belonged to one of the world's oldest religions, known as Zoroastrianism. Here, ceremonial fire towers represent the triumph of truth and light over darkness. Presiding over the battle was one god, Ahura Mazda. Ai-Hanum was a beacon for the Greeks on the empire's eastern frontiers. To many academics, its grandeur confirmed the heroic ideal of Alexander. Here at last was what appeared to be one of the great cities he'd built in Central Asia. But is this marvellous place really Alexandria on the Oxus?
So here, in the only Greek city ever discovered in Central Asia, do we see the hand of Alexander? Well, apparently not. Archaeologists can't quite agree when major construction began here, but they think it's around 280 BC. Now that's nearly 50 years after Alexander came through here.
For 200 years, this was a vibrant capital of the East, a satellite of Greek custom and learning. But Alexander couldn't have built Ai-Hanum. After nearly 3 years of almost constant warfare, in the summer of 327 BC, Alexander left Bactria with the bulk of his army. 4 years later, he would be dead, and the forts and cities he'd briefly conquered were quickly abandoned. So who did build Ai-Hanum and why? The origins of this place are still shrouded in mystery. And it's because a huge amount of the archaeology has simply been erased.
You know, every day in the fields outside Ai-Hanum, astounding discoveries are made by farmers like Khalil here. They find coins, they find gold, and sometimes even statues. But the great problem is, what does he do with it? Because in Afghanistan now, it's totally illegal to trade in antiquities. If he keeps them, he could be arrested. If he sells them, he could be arrested. But there's no agency at the moment that he can give them to where he knows that they are actually going to be held for the people of Afghanistan to view them. Until that day, it'll remain in the black market, and the treasures of Afghanistan will go across the borders into Pakistan and around the world.
Some artefacts have survived the black market, and I've heard that a local chief has filled his tea house with artefacts from Ai-Hanum.
Oh, wow. Well, this is amazing. I'd actually heard there was one column here, but there's it's about 6.
They've been covered with whitewash, but these column capitals are remarkably intact. Carved out of local stone over 2,200 years ago, they are priceless.
Well, the irony is that if the commander hadn't taken these away and he'd left them at Ai-Hanum, they probably would have disappeared. So at least they've been conserved.
This has to be the most extraordinary tea house I've ever seen. The commander has certainly picked some fantastic pieces. But what he hasn't noticed is that all these columns are now upside down. In ancient Greece, Corinthian-style capitals would have been high up by the ceiling. So, if not Alexander, who could have summoned the resources and manpower to create a whole Greek city from scratch? After Alexander died, at the age of just 33, his military commanders carved up the empire he'd created. One general, Seleucus, would command an enormous kingdom that stretched from the eastern Mediterranean all the way to Bactria. Seleucus kept control of the lucrative trade routes that crossed the lands Alexander had conquered. Caravans carted precious cargo like gold, gemstones and cotton from India in the east through Bactria all the way to Greece in the west. And the revenue would have been enough to endow the great city of Ai-Hanum, the capital of this growing province. And if Ai-Hanum was built by Seleucus decades after Alexander's departure, there is no way it could be the lost city I'm looking for. I want to find out what was here when Alexander and his army arrived. I'm on my way to check out an earthwork nearby, a place French archaeologists reckon to have been built during the Bronze Age. And what I find is magnificent.
Well, I'm about 5 kilometres out across the plain from Ai-Hanum. What I'm walking down is an enormous canal. Now, this was dug by hand more than 2,000 years before Alexander the Great got here. Now, can you imagine how many people it would take to dig something like this? I mean, these walls are 50 feet high. This is not just nomadic horsemen who built this. This is a civilization that was advanced enough to actually employ the people to do it and then actually design this place. And it would have brought water right across the plain. It would have been an Eden here. So the question is, where was the great city that this canal fed?
It's not only the canal that has changed. It's hard to imagine a time when this was fertile ground. But once, the Oxus River followed a very different course than today. Signs are everywhere that in the Bronze Age, it flowed across the middle of this plain. Irrigation systems fed a series of villages and farms that flourished here. To date, only one has been excavated, and it's called Shortagai.
Well, I know this place doesn't look like much, but in fact it's incredibly important. It was excavated by a French archaeologist named Frankfurt just before the Soviets came in. And what he discovered was this place was Bronze Age. It's more than 4,000 years old. But what was really exciting was that he found that this was an Indian trading post right here on the Oxus. Now today, the Oxus is about 5 k's away, that blue line you can see. But back then, the river level was higher and it came right in here. And so, this being an Indian trading post puts a whole new spin on everything.
Long before Ai-Hanum was built by the Greeks, Bronze Age traders travelled all the way from the great cities of the Indus Valley in India. They came right across the Pamir Mountains by caravan, all the way to riverside outposts like Shortagai. They carried painted pottery, gold and bronzeware. It was not only goods that travelled on these routes, but people, ideas and spiritual beliefs. Russian historians think the plain surrounding Ai-Hanum could have been the birthplace of the prophet Zoroaster, making this the spiritual heartland of the revolutionary local religion Zoroastrianism. But if this is true, there must have been a great citadel defending it. To find out more, I visit a man who knows this place better than anyone. General Khalil Halik looks after the 125-kilometre stretch of the Oxus River that runs alongside Ai Hanum. It turns out the general's passionate about the history of this area. He tells me that there's evidence all around the barracks we're sitting in. French archaeologists found surface shards thousands of years old. It's actually called Conyacala, and as a customs post, well, it's not a bad position here on the river. But when the French came here in the 1980s, they only had a cursory look. They knew it was Bronze Age, but then they went back to Ai Hanum. But what's got me thinking is that Shorter Guy, that Indian trading post, is also Bronze Age. So it's given me an idea. But to have a look at that, we need to get a bird's eye view. From the air, there's a clear footprint of a large structure, but it looks incomplete. The outer walls end abruptly at the riverbank. It seems most of the inner defences and the citadel have been swept away by the river. But if you fill in the blanks, this is what Conyacala originally looked like. A huge Bronze Age fortified town, over 1 kilometre wide and 3 kilometres in circumference. I believe that 2,000 years before Alexander, this was the capital of a highly advanced trading settlement beside the Oxus, and the holy city of the prophet Zoroaster. So how did Conyacala get wiped out? Well, I think it's quite clear that the Oxus has changed its course and then swept right in here and taken away more than half of the citadel. The question is, what could have caused the Oxus to flood so much that it had the power to take this away? The Oxus flows through a highly active seismic region. There have been more than 6,000 major earthquakes here in the last 1,500 years alone. Geophysicists now believe that in 2200 BC, a series of earthquakes laid waste to the Bronze Age world. These quakes were powerful enough to burst an ice dam hundreds of kilometres upstream. Unleashing a huge torrent of water. So are we looking at the same event? Did a cataclysmic flood destroy this civilization as well? Well, the dates fit. 2200 BC, this citadel was probably here. And so if it's the same event, it could well have destroyed it. In an instant, the mighty Oxus River carved itself a new course, smashing through everything in its path. It ripped Conyacala apart. By the time Alexander arrived, only a fragment of this ancient city remained. But it was still Zoroastrian holy ground. I believe Alexander conquered Conyacala because of its spiritual and strategic importance. He then renamed it Alexandria on the Oxus. And 50 years later, his successors constructed their own sacred Greek city next to the old, the place we know today as Ai Hanum, the city of Lady Moon. Well, it's terrific stuff, but unfortunately, these questions may never be answered. But what is for sure
is that the Oxus really has changed its course, and in doing so, it destroyed a civilization that was here for thousands of years.
At last, I've started to unravel the mystery of Alexander's lost city. Through the ages, the legend of Alexander has become larger than life. His route was grueling, and the battles he fought were hard-won. It's now clear to me that Alexander had neither the time nor the resources to build 16 cities along the way. Many of the cities he conquered were already highly advanced settlements when the Greeks arrived. When Alexander took over, these places were simply renamed in his honor. He did create his own forts and would have re-engineered city defenses, but there's no sign of the great Alexandrian cities of legend, not even on the Oxus. Like the Greeks, we have crossed this hostile and unpredictable landscape. Here, Alexander carved out a foothold by capturing strategic crossroads. He left Greek garrisons and made alliances with local tribes. And in the thriving cities of ancient Bactria, he found the remnants of a civilization far more ancient than his own. Alexander laid claim to an ancient ruin. But it was the Greek colonists who came after him that built the first great Greek city in Central Asia. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. In 330 BC, Alexander and his army marched east into the land of Bactria on the river Oxus. They'd already endured 5 grueling years of battle. Yet despite a series of decisive victories against his Persian enemy, Alexander pushed on. Drawn by the promise of the most treasured resources in the world. For Alexander, the Oxus was a place of myth, legend, and riches.
But let's consider for a moment that Alexander and his generals knew exactly where they were. They'd come to the Oxus because they believed that this was the land where Jason and the Argonauts came. So was this the land of the Golden Fleece?
I want to follow the ancient trade routes and time-worn trails that today cross the Badlands of Afghanistan. To discover the treasured resources the Greeks found in the East and took back to the West. We're travelling along the Oxus to find the precious raw materials that made this region a highly prized crossroads in the ancient world. Navigating through this terrain successfully today is just as challenging as it was in Alexander's time. The middle delta of the Oxus is a constantly changing landscape of sandbanks, channels and shifting islands.
Well, we've just had to take another route because the river, which is totally in flood, has come in and taken out the road. And it just shows you how much this place changes. Almost overnight, the whole roadway can get taken out, a whole village can get taken out. You just look down here, this place is just falling apart. No, he's just digging himself in too. No. If he gets it out, stops it, then we shorten the rope, okay? Okay. Hey. Oh. Yeah, very good.
Alexander faced the Pamir and Hindu Kush mountain ranges of northern Afghanistan. And just like the Greek regiments marching into the unknown 2,300 years ago, neither Jamshid or Habib, my guides, have ever travelled this route before. From now on, we have to rely only on my GPS and directions from locals. As an outsider, finding your way in Afghanistan today can be almost impossible. One of the problems is we're using maps made in the 1980s when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the place names are very different now. The map has changed even more radically since the time of Alexander. The Greeks called the Hindu Kush mountain range the Caucasus. But today, the mountain range we call the Caucasus lies 2,500 kilometers northwest in the modern Republic of Georgia. It's this confusion of ancient and modern place names that has led many academics to assume that Alexander was at times hopelessly lost. I believe that far from being lost, Alexander knew exactly where he was. Accounts of explorers and ancient mariners stretch back into the mists of time. Alexander would have heard of the famous explorer Cyclax, whose journey in 515 BC took him from the Mediterranean to Afghanistan and beyond. But Alexander may also have been following a much earlier tale of riches in this mysterious region. The myth of Jason and the Golden Fleece is perhaps the earliest account we have of a voyage to the east in search of treasure. Jason was undoubtedly one of Alexander's heroes. Buried deep in the legend is a whisper of truth. And there's an important link to Jason's story here in Afghanistan today.
Let's consider for a moment that Alexander and his generals knew exactly where they were. They'd come to the Oxus because they believed that this was the land where Jason and the Argonauts came. Well, there's one thing that remains from that time, and it's the way people get gold out of the river. This is actually sheep's fleece. The gold comes down and is washed through it. And when you pick it up, the fleece carries gold. So was this the land of the Golden Fleece?
Mineral treasures like gold made the Oxus an alluring prize for any conquering army.
That's fantastic. Well, he's actually got quite a bit of gold here. It's very, very high quality. And what's incredible is this really powered this empire right through all the different civilizations.
And the ancient treasure trove is still here for those that search hard enough.
Jamshid, how much money are they going to make from this?
He says that if we work very slow, 100 hours, 50 hours. But if you work, 10,000.
So that's about $200. So it's not bad business, this, even today. $200 a day on each one of these. There's 2 operating at the moment. $400 a day is pretty good money in northern Afghanistan. What?
The Argonauts sailed from Greece to the land of the Golden Fleece. The trouble is, it's not possible to sail from the west all the way to Afghanistan today. But at the end of the last ice age, around 14,000 years ago, the climate changed. Vast ice sheets of the northern hemisphere melted, making sea levels much higher. So high that a waterway, the fabled river Phasis, connected the Caspian and the Black Seas. The Phasis stayed open for thousands of years. Jason's myth could be based upon tales of the first brave mariners of the Neolithic Age. 8,000 years ago, they travelled and traded across the seas, eastwards to the Oxus River. By the time of Alexander, the river Phasis was closed, but the idea of the Golden Fleece lived on. And once Alexander conquered ancient Bactria, the Greeks used the wealth from trade in these materials to develop their empire in the east. To this day, the rivers of Afghanistan are laden with alluvial gold. And in the hills, silver, iron ore, rubies, and dozens of other rare minerals continue to be mined. Extracting precious ore was easy. Transporting and trading it was the hard part. Aside from the perilous journey itself, ancient traders lived with the constant threat of bandits. For Alexander, finding this source of precious raw materials may have been a prize worth fighting for. We're heading for the ancient trade routes that cross the Hindu Kush. The name of this vast range means Hindu killer, because it is one of the most unforgiving landscapes in the world. Today, these roads are used for opium smuggling. 70% of the world's supply comes from Afghanistan. Much of it is trafficked through here. This area has also recently seen Taliban activity. And even though I prefer to travel unarmed, Jamshid insists on borrowing a gun for this leg of the journey. We reach the village of Cha'ab, and while Jamshid asks for directions to the road south, I head up to the remains of a Bactrian fort. For Alexander's soldiers, left here to garrison this position, it must have been a lonely and forbidding place.
Well, we're now heading into the mountains. We're about 40 kilometres from the Oxus. And these were fortresses, probably to secure trade or even a farming area. But we know this is a really ancient site because the French were here in the 70s, and they actually had a cursory look around and found some pottery. But from this point, further south, no archaeologist has had a look. So for the next 4 or 5 days, we're going into uncharted territory.
Like us, Alexander's regiments pushed on. From the Oxus River lowlands, we've been travelling north. The road we are following may not seem so important today, but we're only 300 kilometres from the fertile plains of the Indus Valley in India. This is an ancient highway. For over 2,000 years before Alexander arrived, it was an important link between the Bactrian and Indus civilizations, two of the oldest and most advanced in world history. And it was only one of a huge network of trade routes. After Alexander's conquest, these communication links became the arteries of the greatest of all Greek empires. Nomadic people like the Kuchi have been transporting and trading goods and livestock along these same roads for millennia. Today, the passes into India are closed to the Kuchi, and their nomadic cycle now lies only within the borders of Afghanistan. Life here today is more dangerous than ever. The Kuchi population has been decimated by landmines. They were planted over 30 years ago, during the war between Soviet invaders and the Afghan Mujahideen resistance. We've arranged to stop for the night at a Halo Trust landmine clearance camp. It's a UK charity that's systematically removing the millions of landmines in Afghanistan. The commander and his team have allowed me to watch them work.
So you have to wear our helmets from here.
Okay. We're just signing and writing our blood group in case something does go wrong. They know what to pump into us. Thank you.
Painted rocks guide us in. During the Soviet occupation, this was an army base. They planted landmines all around, the most deadly kind of defense mechanism.
And this is what they're looking for. This is the outer casing of an anti-personnel mine, and it's rubber, so it's very, very hard to detect. The other parts are ceramic. The only metal is actually a spring and a firing pin.
To date, landmines have killed 76 local people. And 4 of the Halo Trust team have died just in the last few months. Every time the metal detector gives a signal, it's a tense moment.
This is obviously a really delicate exercise, and I just can't believe how brave these guys are to do this every day. 5 in the morning till 12 in the afternoon, and all they do is dig up mines so people can come and plant their crops and actually have a normal life. It must be one of the most dangerous jobs in the world. To keep these ancient trade routes open, the team risk their lives every minute, and they're paid just $120 a month. And this is the frustrating part. Most of the time it's just a bullet, an empty casing. But you can never tell. Either it's going to be a landmine or a jump-up booby-trap mine. So it's a very painstaking, very slow job. You can imagine that every square metre of this whole field and all around this old Soviet base has to be cleared inch by inch. The team have now found a mine. They clear the area, prepare an explosive, and pack it in around the mine to destroy it safely. For me, the work of the Halo Trust is a sobering reminder of how perilous it can be exploring the past here in Afghanistan. Landmines are one hidden killer Alexander didn't have to look out for. But his crossing was far from easy. Ambushes and rock slides made every pass a potentially fatal trap. Now I want to find one of the most important treasures of the Oxus, a rare semi-precious stone traded from here as far afield as ancient Egypt. But first, we have to cross what many call the Afghan Badlands, a realm so hostile that it was never tamed by Alexander. Even the Afghan government has very little control here. It's the stomping ground of the Islamic force, the Mujahideen. Not somewhere you want to get lost. And we need directions.
Didn't know about that.
Figured this was going to happen. Is this the Kishim Road?
Yes, this is
So we go
Kishim
back
Road.
that way. Where is the side of the bridge?
In here, down.
Yes. We're called over to the police outpost. Well, it looks like we're just being checked out because they weren't expecting anybody, particularly anybody like me, turning up right in the middle of nowhere. I've been summoned.
Yeah, he's a religious leader.
This can be a bit of a tricky area because there's still a lot of Mujahideen leaders here, or what they call Mujahid leaders, but basically the government doesn't have a lot of control here. And this gentleman is actually a policeman, and so he's one of the only guys that is good to meet here, and he didn't know who we were, and it's a bit of a tricky area. So everybody's happy now. We'll see if we can find out something. We get directions to the ancient route through the mountainous heart of Afghanistan.
Across the Kocha, a tributary of the Oxus, we head north towards Faizabad, the mountain capital of Badakhshan province. This is the only centre of any size for hundreds of kilometres. Faizabad's a raw frontier town. Today, the ancient trade routes carry opium to Tajikistan and Taliban fighters to the north. We need to stock up on supplies, and the produce in Faizabad market is a pleasant surprise.
This is like an Aladdin's cave, isn't it? All the things you really, really need when you're a Westerner in Afghanistan.
But it's not just food I'm after. There's one very special commodity that I want to find. A raw material that was exported all over the ancient world, prized in the highest echelons by the Egyptian pharaohs.
Well, this stuff is like gold up here. It's called lapis lazuli, and Badakhshan is absolutely famous for it. Now, if you remember the mask of Tutankhamun with those wonderful gold stripes and then blue, well, this is this stuff. It's been coming out of this part of the world for about 7,000 years, and there's little shops all over the place making jewellery. But further south from here, about a day's journey, are the actual mines where they mine the stuff for Tutankhamun's mask, and that's where we're going to head. Thank you.
Tutankhamun is the most famous Egyptian king of all time. When he died 3,300 years ago, his mummy was adorned with an extravagant golden death mask. It's one of the most iconic symbols of ancient Egyptian craftsmanship in existence today. The long strips of blue stone are made of lapis, hand-cut and transported from the mines of ancient Bactria. Just like the conquering Greeks, I'm looking for the source of this treasure. And there's one place, high in the mountains, so rich in lapis, it's still mined today.
Well, this is not the best place for this to happen. This area isn't that secure. So it's about the worst place we actually want to be stopped and changing a puncher for 20 minutes. Doesn't feel so good.
The road we're on has to be one of the most isolated in the world.
What did he say?
He said that it's half hour.
Half hour. So very close.
Yeah, very close.
We climb higher and higher to the age-old mining settlement of Sarsang and move our gear into the police compound. Every day, goods and tools are either hauled in here or improvised on the spot. Other than expensive generators, there's no power. Outsiders here are rare. Foreign faces make people decidedly uneasy. The local commander has enough trouble keeping control of this remote outpost without having to look out for uninvited travellers. But we're guests, and as guests, we automatically fall under our host's protection. Without fuss, a meal appears, and Jamshid and Habib fill the commander in on news from the outside world. Embracing this culture of hospitality enables us to penetrate so deeply into these remote corners of Afghanistan unarmed. The miners' settlement is spread out over what looks very much like an avalanche zone. Shelters built entirely out of local rock shield the miners from the elements winter and summer. Lapis has been mined here for thousands of years, and it is still valuable today. It's these men's livelihood. In these remote highlands, there's no government controls on lapis. Most of it is packed on mules all the way to the stonecutters of Pakistan and India. Way above the valley are the mines. Like seams of gold, the veins of lapis run deep into the mountainsides. I walk with the light-headed effort of altitude and the promise of exploring the oldest continuously worked mine anywhere on Earth. Doing this every day, hauling heavy mining equipment, is a punishing life.
Well, we're at about 3,000 metres here, and it's cool inside the mine. There's a breeze coming out of here. It's much, much cooler than the 35 degrees outside. But what's incredible is this mine has been worked continuously for between 6,000 and 7,000 years, and this whole mountain is catacombed with little tunnels. And from here, the lapis has been taken right across the world, even to ancient Egypt. As we pick our way along the tunnels, it's like walking through time. This is mine number 1, the oldest of all. Over thousands of years, generations of miners cut this tunnel deeper and deeper into the rock face. Somewhere here in the darkness, there's a point where around 1325 BC, an exceptionally rich blue vein was found and extracted. Well, this is what they're looking for. This is a whole scene through here. I don't really know the quality because obviously I'm not a gem expert, but you can see if I put some water on it, the blue really starts to come out. And it's just marvellous that nature makes this colour, you know. Nowhere else do you see a blue like that. Marvellous. In the hands of an Egyptian royal jeweller, rocks of lapis were transformed, cut, polished and bound in gold to make the dazzling death mask of King Tutankhamun.
sealed in his solid gold tomb to protect his journey to the afterlife. The riches of the Oxus tell the story of civilization's earliest beginnings. They reveal that long before Alexander, our world was far more connected than I'd ever realized. Luxury goods were loaded onto caravans and trading boats and transported 300 kilometers to Harappa in the Indus Valley, 2,500 kilometers to Babylon in Mesopotamia, 3,800 kilometers to Thebes in ancient Egypt, and over 4,000 kilometers to Athens in Greece. Today, these miners labour to meet world demand for this alluring blue stone.
Salam. How are you? My God.
این ماشین کمپیروسونه این تو جوازه میکنه باز دینامو پر میشه باز پتاقی و پلته
Says that we put dynamite here first to make a hole, and they put dynamite inside and blast it, and then they clean it till they find the vein. You see if the vein is going here. Yes. So that's the following.
How long has he worked in the mine here?
من چقدر وقت شده اینجا کار میکنی؟ 1 year.
1 year. So it's very dusty work they're doing. And the problem is, you never know where these veins go. It's like gold. And sometimes they get right on one like this, and then they can follow it. But a lot of the time they lose it, and they spend weeks and weeks trying to find them again. So sometimes work doesn't pay very well. Thank you.
These are terrible conditions. In Sarsang, lung disease is just a matter of time. But it's death by dynamite and rock falls that are all too often the common killers. This is one of the most seismically active regions on Earth. An earthquake could hit at any time. After each long shift, every miner lugs his treasure down the mountain, where middlemen and traders bid for the raw stone. Lapis is formed of 3 different minerals: lazurite, calcite and pyrite. And its quality varies depending on its colour and smoothness of texture.
So what we're looking for is really, really deep blue. So these are really nice pieces, which are probably worth taking. See, this one would be lovely to make a pendant or a heart. And that one's like a lovely sort of amulet. But all of these together, how much?
The work of these 21st century Afghans is a living link back to the time of Alexander.
Very good. Thank you very much.
For the ancient Greeks, conquest and occupation began by controlling the mountain passes and the flow of trade. Alexander was undefeated in battle. And now he set his sights on a land with even more mineral wealth than Bactria. For the Greeks, India was the eastern edge of their known world. It was a mysterious and exotic source of untold riches: gold, textiles and precious minerals. And the mountain passes into India have hardly changed since Alexander passed through here almost 2,300 years ago. We've driven over 600 kilometres from the Oxus River Valley across some of the most rugged terrain in the world. The Wakhan Corridor is a 330-kilometre strip of land bordered by Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan to the south. We're following an ancient highway that leads to India. The Pamir mountain valleys are some of the highest on Earth. That's why English explorers named it the roof of the world. Ancient caravans would trek along these grueling crossroads between the east and west.
Trouble with travelling on these rivers is you've got to do it at the right time. Otherwise, if there's too much water, you just can't get through. The next 4 or 5 k's, we've just got to go straight up the riverbed.
Before invading India, Alexander had to secure his army's supply line. But he was constantly harried by local tribes, who would ambush his army before retreating to seemingly impenetrable mountain fortresses. I want to find out what it was like for Greek troops to attack one of these natural bastions. And there are no roads where we're heading. We cross the Oxus, where the Wakhan meets the Boragil Pass into Pakistan and India beyond. Alexander and his army battled their way through these ranges for 6 long months in the dead of winter. He is believed to have crossed from Afghanistan into India south of here. But I'm convinced over the months Alexander would have split his army into different units to crush resistance along the strategic passes of this mountain corridor. Greek records tell us Alexander laid siege to one great fortified crag here in the Pamir. But dozens more must have gone unreported. And over 100 years ago, in 1904, an intrepid archaeologist explorer came here on Alexander's trail. His name was Aurel Stein.
Sophie, where do you think? Where to cross?
In spite of Stein's efforts, to date, the evidence of these remote citadels from Alexander's time is scant. But I believe this place can shed a great deal of light on Alexander's mountain battles. Built over 1,300 years ago by the Tibetans, this ruined fort is a monument to a lost chapter in history. The site of one of the most ruthless sieges ever to take place in these mountains. It's known as Cansir Fort, and it was just like the defences Alexander and his men would have come up against. Its story gives us an idea of the tactics that earned Alexander a reputation as the greatest besieger of all time. In 747 AD, the Tibetans ruled this valley. They built the fortress to resist the invading armies of China. Between 7 and 9 in the morning, 3 columns of Chinese cavalry and infantry mustered into a 10,000-strong force in the valley below. The Chinese commander, Xian Qi, moved quickly to cut off all approaches to the stronghold, crushing the defences at river level in a few hours. Then they scaled these steep slopes to the isolated citadel. High in their rock fortress, the Tibetans seemed safe, but in fact, they were hopelessly trapped.
Well, that is one hell of a climb. This citadel stands at about 4,200 metres, and our guides have just told me that we're the first Westerners that they know have actually made it up here. It's an incredible place. Incredible to build, but I think incredible to defend. And if you can imagine back there in August 747, the Tibetans up here looking across the valley there at 10,000 Chinese assembling, and then them coming steadily across the river. It would have been a terrifying sight. And knowing that they couldn't get out of here, it would have been one of the most frightening experiences. And it ended in absolute disaster.
The Chinese experience here at Kansia gives us an insight into what the sieges of the Greeks would have been like. Their strategy just as devastating. Commander Xian Qi now pushed home the final assault.
And he did it with skill. After routing the defences down at river level, he actually massacred 6,000 of the Tibetans. And then he outflanked them. He came up these gullies, and then his men poured through that saddle. There was only about 1,000 Tibetans left here to guard the citadel, and they were overwhelmed. Only about 2,000 or 3,000 actually made it out, and they fled up the Baragul Pass into what is today Pakistan. It is one of the great defeats of military history, right here on the roof of the world.
"1,000 years before the Chinese, it would have been exactly the same for Alexander's troops. Facing what must at times have seemed an impossible challenge, they conquered this hostile borderland. Now the road to India lay open. Ancient legends had told of the riches of the East, and Alexander turned myth into reality. 2,300 years ago, Alexander came to ancient Bactria to conquer his enemy, and discovered a realm that overflowed with mineral wealth. His empire would profit from the ancient world's most sought-after currency, precious materials like gold and lapis. They would control ancient trade and communication links all the way from Greek city-states in the west to India in the east. Alexander's success in far-flung lands transformed the Greek Empire and changed our world forever. In the wild highlands and war-torn plains of Central Asia lie tantalizing traces of the ancient world. Here 2,300 years ago, Alexander the Great became the first European to rule the East. In an epic campaign, the ancient Greeks crushed the Persian Empire. It was a turning point in human history. Along the banks of the mighty Oxus River, Alexander discovered a highly developed Eastern civilization. My name is David Adams. I'm a photojournalist, and I want to explore the footprints of this ancient world, today almost entirely erased. This is my quest for Alexander's lost world. Far Eastern Afghanistan. One of the most remote and extreme landscapes on Earth. When Alexander marched east along age-old mountain passes, he was securing his route to India. He ventured into a realm of lost cities and forgotten tribes. For the final stretch of my journey, I want to trek up to the Oxus headwaters to meet the people that call themselves the children of Alexander. Here lies the trail of great European explorers that came to find the source of the River Oxus.
Well, this is it, the source of the Oxus. It's absolutely bone-chilling. But the source really isn't the issue. What the issue is the amazing civilizations that this river has given birth to.
There's a connection between this ancient river and the story of our earliest beginnings. The source of civilization. In a series of historic victories, over more than 4 years of battle, Alexander defeated his Persian enemy. Now his empire stretched from Greece in the west to the kingdom of Bactria in the east. All that stood in his way were the mountain passes that led to the ultimate prize, India. These inhospitable and remote ranges are the same today as they were in Alexander's time. So far, we've driven all the way from the Oxus River Valley. We're now venturing into the Wakhan Corridor, a 300-kilometre-long strip of immense peaks, the meeting place of the Pamir and Hindu Kush Mountains, bordered by Tajikistan to the north and Pakistan to the south. Surviving Greek records reveal little about Alexander's route through the maze of ancient highways that follow these mountain valleys. But what's certain is back then, Alexander and his army had nothing like our four-wheel drives.
I've only ever seen Bactrian camels in the zoo, so to see them here right on the Oxus is just incredible. They're just left out here to roam, and then obviously when they're needed, they're used as pack animals and they're taken up higher into the Pamir. It's just so exciting.
Alexander was inspired to campaign from Bactria to India by the story of one of his heroes, the god Dionysus. This ancient mosaic shows the triumphant return of Dionysus from India. Alexander believed that to do the same would make him immortal. We're heading for a village called Sarhad, the age-old terminus for Central Asian caravans that brought people, ideas and goods between east and west.
Well, as my dear old dad used to say, when you come to the end, stop. This is as far as the road goes. This is Sarhad. From now on, we walk.
And there's something very special about Sarhad. It's the home of the Waki, and they've lived here almost forever. They believe they are the living descendants of Alexander himself. It's been over 2,300 years since the Greeks marched through these highlands. But today, the legend of Alexander still lives large. Since the earliest of times, the origin of the Waki has been a mystery. Subsistence farmers, they cultivate crops in the spring and move up the valley to higher pasture in the summer. It's said that the blood of Alexander the Great runs through their veins.
You know, I have a feeling that these guys actually haven't had their photo taken before, or actually seen the image on a camera.
If you look at the children's faces, it's easy to see where the idea came from. They have distinctly different features to the Afghans we've met so far in the lowlands. And some have striking blue-green coloured eyes. But did Alexander and his soldiers father children in these villages? I'd love it to be true, but it seems no more than a romantic idea. One of Alexander's biographers, Curtius, tells us that in 327 BC, Alexander met a mountain tribe like the Waki in a neighbouring valley. Just as his army was about to lay siege to their small town, Alexander stopped his attack and declared the community to be the children of his hero, the god Dionysus. Mountain tribes like the Waki were already here when the Greeks arrived. So if not the children of Alexander, who are the Waki descended from? Their cultural traditions and language suggest their lineage stretches back long before the time of the Greeks. New genome research has revealed that their village Sarhad sits upon a major route in man's evolutionary path. 30,000 years ago, a primordial people lived here. As the climate changed over thousands of years, their descendants were forced to move down to warmer climes in Europe and Asia. By 6000 BC, they'd settled along the fertile river system of the Oxus. Others reached the Indus Valley in India. Their belief systems and technology spread. And by 2000 BC, the first great river cities dominated the Bronze Age world, setting the course of history. I'm convinced tribes like the Waki are the descendants of the first settlers in these high pastures. To dig deeper into their story, I want to find out exactly where the river Oxus begins. The Waki are going to guide me higher up into the mountains to explore their ancient homeland and search for the source of the Oxus. It's going to take a month to get up and back. There are no roads, no places to resupply. We have to carry everything in with us.
Well, Rudyard Kipling famously wrote that east is east and west is west, and never the twain shall meet. But here in Sarhad, they actually do meet. because the great caravans used to come here. Those coming over from China used to unload here, and those then taking it to the Oxus and Bulk and all the way to Europe used to take the loads on. There would have been hundreds of caravans just like this, heading off into the Pamez and going the other way. So what we're doing is actually a time-honoured tradition of packing up animals and heading into the wilderness. Thank you.
It's summer, but Alexander and his 22,000 men scaled the passes into India in the depths of winter. This was a dangerous gamble. In these vicious conditions, there'd be much less chance of being ambushed by hostile hill tribes. But in temperatures as low as -40, Alexander's army would have paid a heavy price. And they didn't have anything like the kit we're using.
Well, you're probably wondering why one Ferengi has got so many horses and men. We've actually got 16 horses, 16 handlers, 4 porters, and then there's our party of 5. But travelling like this is exponential. When you have things like we do, generators, medical kits, you need more and more horses. Therefore, you need more and more men. So the caravan gets longer and longer. Hence, we've got a lot of horses and men.
Our caravan is nothing compared to Alexander's vast baggage trains. Keeping his regiment supplied and moving forward in this terrain was an extraordinary feat. He was unbeaten in battle. But it was the frontier tribesmen who now threatened to bring an end to his winning streak. Alexander's army survived the precipitous valleys for 6 bleak and grueling months. Without control of these passes, Alexander could never secure his burgeoning empire. This was a strategic region worth fighting for, and even dying for. It's time to set up camp for the night. But no tents for the Waki. Unlike me, they're hardened to the elements. Their great-grandfathers very likely accompanied an ambitious Danish explorer who came here just over 100 years ago in 1898. His name was Ole Olafsson, and he was tracking the elusive source of the River Oxus. Olafsson was convinced that its headwaters had given rise to the Waki's ancient ancestors. We're heading up towards 4,000 meters. And for me, it's a step-by-step existence.
Well, I must say that I'd half expected to actually be following the river, and I hadn't expected so many hills like this. They call this the Snake, as it winds up, and it definitely is a good climb.
The Waki know every twist and turn. Each year, they bring their sheep to graze in these highlands and trade with nomadic tribes. Nowadays, it's slim pickings, but it hasn't always been this way. After a couple of days of arduous climbing, we make it to the high plains of Langar. In the time of the Waki's ancient ancestors, the climate here was very different. Scientists suggest it was as much as 5 degrees warmer. In these ranges, ancient terraced fields and irrigation canals have been found. Judged to be thousands of years old, it's evidence of sustained cultivation. Olafsson believed that people lived here even before the development of the region's oldest religion, Zoroastrianism. He got some of his ideas from the Avesta, the Zoroastrian holy book. It describes a mythical mountain called Mount Hara and a mighty river that ran beside it. Trekking through here, Olafsson saw the parallels with the Pamir Mountains and the Oxus River Plains. He was in no doubt that this was what the Zoroastrians called the Garden of our First Parents, meaning the Garden of Eden. Seeing this amazing land for the first time, I can't help but think he was onto something. As we climb higher, it's like entering a completely different realm. The Bami Dunya, the roof of the world. There are a series of graves here, but no one knows how old they are.
It doesn't seem like they're Muslim graves. It's hard to tell if the bodies were facing Mecca or not because they've been disturbed. But really, they seem to be a lot older. This place is absolutely intriguing. There are a number of things that happened here. The graves, and possibly the shrine, are from one period, maybe Chinese. These flags are Islamic. The horns actually hark back to a much earlier period when people worshipped goats or horned animals.
It's not surprising that memorials like these reveal a mix of religious influences. This seems like a remote, wild corner of Afghanistan. But for thousands of years, it was an ancient highway. In 327 BC, when Alexander crossed these mountains, this valley would have been a busy thoroughfare full of traders and caravans. They were heading to and from the cities of Bactria in the Oxus lowlands. These were prosperous centres with elaborate Zoroastrian temples. Well established in the Bronze Age and still thriving when the Greeks arrived. The network of trade routes stretched right across Bactria. As well as people and technology, it carried goods like gold, spices and opium to the cities of the Indus Valley in India, to Babylon in Mesopotamia, to Thebes in Egypt, and all the way to Athens in Greece. By using these vital communication links, the Greeks began to build their empire in the east. Today, not many goods or travellers come through these passes. The trade in opium, though, is booming. The majority of the world's opium traffic comes from Afghanistan. It's smuggled into Tajikistan and then on to the west. But a good deal stays in these mountains. These locals trade over 100 of their sheep every year to feed their opium addiction. Late in the afternoon, we make it into Jazgoz, an encampment belonging to the nomadic Kyrgyz that have made the roof of the world their home. This is as far as the Waki can take us.
Payday, same the world over.
Their earnings are worked out by how heavy the loads were and how many hours are spent away from home. And everyone comes up with his own grand total. Our guide Shafi has to sort it all out and distribute our tips without offending anybody. Eventually, happy with their lot, the Waki head for home. And I start to get acquainted with my new hosts. The family of local tribal leader Haji Hosma. The Kyrgyz migrated along trade routes from the north only 200 years ago. Long after the original settlers left these high pastures. Though they live in a very similar way, in felt yurts, with a few modern tweaks. It's July, but a dusting of snow on the mountains is a chilling reminder that the long months of winter are not far away. This is one of the toughest climates on Earth. These Kyrgyz families survive by herding and breeding yaks and goats. There's a limited choice of food up here. So tonight, I'm cooking dinner.
So what I'm trying to make, hopefully, is spaghetti pescatore, which, if my memory serves me, is spaghetti with fish, because we have some lovely fresh tuna. I don't know if it's going to be quite the same colour in the can. Very tasty onions and a few herbs and things. So we'll see how we go.
I'm betting that this is the first tuna ever to make it up here. But I'm not so sure what the locals think of my signature dish. When Alexander and his troops journeyed through mountain passes in winter, food was extremely scarce. The streams and grazing ground for their pack animals and horses were frozen. Facing starvation and hypothermia, they fended off hit-and-run assaults by hostile local tribes. To the Greeks, the craggy strongholds seemed impenetrable. The peaks too sheer for their catapults. Alexander's archers scaled the cliffsides, and were repelled time and time again. Twice wounded just a valley or two south of here, it was the battles Alexander fought with the hardy men of these mountains that were the toughest of all. I've been given the chance to find out just how demanding doing battle at these extreme altitudes must have been. Today the Kyrgyz are gathering to play a traditional war game called bushkazi. And I've been invited to take part.
This is amazing. There's must be 50, 60 horsemen of just coming in from all different parts of the valley.
They've come across the passes from Tajikistan and Pakistan to celebrate a marriage. And no Kyrgyz wedding is complete without a wild bout of bushkazi. It's game on. This is as close as I will ever get to taking part in an ancient battle. And on one of the highest playing fields in the world, it's hard for me to breathe up here, let alone ride. We're in a frenzied tug of war with the carcass of a goat. Riders charge as fast as they can around a peg and back to the centre of the pitch. I finally get the hang of it. It's a high adrenaline game. And the altitude takes the fight out of me. As I retire exhausted, Haji gives me the champion's coat.
Well, I think I've been given some great honour by having this, but I certainly haven't earned it, considering the way that these guys ride. One good game was about all I had in me. At the moment, these guys can play forever. It's incredible the stamina these guys have got. And the horses, the power. It's just fantastic. You would never think that you could get this much out of a horse at 4,200 metres. Oh, wow.
These Kyrgyz horses give me an idea of just what Alexander's cavalry endured. After months of battle, Alexander eventually subdued the mountain tribes. He had seized tenuous control of some of the most ancient human highways on Earth. And the prize still lay ahead. Now Alexander marched to the plains of India. Next morning, it's time for us to move on. I want to find the source of the Oxus, the cradle of civilization in Central Asia. To find the river's source, I have to find its longest tributary. Haji has been riding these passes for 40 years. He knows every stream and valley.
Are they equal, or is this river smaller?
When Olafsson came here, he followed a stream called the Berget.
Here, it's another day. But in here is the...
It's over 30 kilometers east of here, towards the border with China. Over 1,200 years ago, these borderlands were part of the Tibetan Empire. But then, the Chinese began to encroach on their territory.
And this little shrine is a terrific example. The locals round here consider this an Islamic site. So the story goes, a holy man once passed this way and they erected this temple in his honor. But we know differently, because when the Chinese had defeated the Tibetans, they came back through here and they noted that this temple was already here. Now that was 747, so that means this is very old, probably Buddhist. It just shows you how the stories change over time.
There's so little recorded history about these isolated ranges, it's hard to separate the hearsay and the folklore from the facts. Trying to work out the names of geographical features, like valleys, tributaries and rivers, is even harder. Olafsson was meticulous in his search. He measured the length and flow of the Berget and declared it to be the source. But he missed a vital link. The Berget runs down from the mountains, joins the Wakan River and flows into the Oxus. Olafsson noted another river east of the Berget, and it flowed into Lake Chakmatine. But he didn't explore it. It's called the River Chalep today, and it's far more important than Olafsson realized. One of its branches flows into the lake, then runs in a great arc to the north and eventually joins the Oxus. Remarkably, these rivers all come from the same source, the Chalep.
Well, this is the beautiful Lake Chakmatine. Now, the local Kurzigs also call it Chalep Lake, the same as the river. And it's a real contender as the source of the Oxus, because the water comes way up on the Tajik border, down the Chalep, into the lake, and then through a series of lakes, it forms the Aksu River, which then bends right around, becomes the Maghreb River, and then flows into the Oxus. So the method in our madness in trekking along here is to go and measure the water coming out at the end of the lake, because now in August is the biggest time of melt off the glaciers. So it's ideal to see the real flow.
I'm measuring the outflow from the lake to determine whether it's strong enough to be the source of the Oxus.
Onto the land. No, don't pull. Come out of the water.
I know this looks pretty basic, but actually it's quite scientific.
Go back to the end. Go back. Okay. Now, in case you're wondering what I'm trying to achieve here, I'm trying to measure the velocity of this river. And I'm going to drop this bottle and then time how long it takes to cover the distance. And that will give me the velocity of the river. and hopefully I'm faster than the bottle. So here we go. Mad dogs and Englishmen, I think they say. Mad dogs and Australians. Okay. So that took 48.37 seconds. I'm sure these guys think I'm absolutely stark raving mad doing this, but there is a reason. Now, what I'm doing here is measuring the width of the flow, and then I'll measure with these marks, which are a foot each, of how deep this is.
It's flowing at a heck of a rate.
Foot.
Now we need to know its length. By my calculations, it's 442 kilometres from the source of Olofsson's Bergot to the confluence with the Oxus. But the Chalep is 534 kilometres from its source to the confluence. It seems that Olofsson got it wrong. It's not the Bergot, but this river, the Chalep, that is the longest. The problem is, in 1911, an earthquake measuring 8 or 9 on the Richter scale caused a landslide that completely dammed its route. That means the Chalep was the source of the Oxus in ancient times. But today, there has to be a new source. There's only one alternative. It flows down from the icy peaks of the Little Pamir, and it's called the Wajir River.
Well, I think I've got my figures right, but they actually don't mean much until we get up into the Wajir and actually compare the two systems. And that's 4 days away.
We're heading along the ancient passes that lead east towards China. This is one of the last great wildernesses in the world. Nothing has changed in this breathtaking landscape for thousands of years. It has remained a strategic buffer zone since the time of Alexander. Down through the centuries, successive armies have passed through these borderlands. And there are signs here of the most recent incursion. This line of barbed wire is all that remains of the secret missile base built by the Soviet Union soon after they invaded Afghanistan in 1979. Soviet interest in controlling Central Asian territory and trade routes had been building for a century or more. And no one was more aware of the Soviet threat in these parts than celebrated British explorer George Curzon. A politician and an aristocrat, he too believed the Oxus was a great parent stream of humanity. Curzon trekked to the Wajir River Valley in 1894 and concluded it was the source. But he was wrong. It's not as long as the Chalep, though it may be the longest tributary still flowing today. In their winter coat, yaks are like badly designed carpets.
These really are the most marvellous animals. This is the hornless variety of yak, and I'm just wondering if you can see the sort of family resemblance here. What do you think? You think they're from the same family? Hello, cuz. Good boy.
Since we set off from Sarhad to find the source of the Oxus, we've been trekking for more than 2 weeks. Under the rain and sleet, the temperature's dropping. The going is getting tough, and we've had to leave the rest of the caravan behind in the valley. We make our final camp before the push up towards 5,000 meters and the end of the Wajir River Valley. We're now just 2 kilometers away from the border with China. There's not a soul to be seen. But there is a haven in this freezing terrain.
It's actually quite roomy in here. The name of this place is Koshtrabat, which means 2 houses. These are very old caravanserais. The caravans used to come down from China all the way through to Afghanistan in the middle of winter, and they needed a place to stay.
It's clear that in ancient times, these rudimentary shelters were built for travelers along this inhospitable ancient valley. Finally, our destination is within reach. The source of the Wajir flows from somewhere up ahead beneath a massive glacier.
Oh, fantastic. Isn't it amazing? Thank you. Oh. Well, this is it. There's actually 2 caves. You can see it goes a bit further, but there's also another one over there. And what we're going to have to do is get into the river and test the water, see how fast it's flowing and how much water's coming out. But just to give you an idea how high we are here, if you're living at sea level and you walk outside and look straight up 4.5 kilometers, that's where we're standing. Now, coming out of this cave, there's an absolute full blast of cold air. It's absolutely bone-chilling. Reach up in and go.
The flow is about as strong as the Chalep. Now, I want to work out its length. It's 459 kilometers from the ice cave back to the confluence with the Oxus. It is the longest tributary still flowing, which makes the Wajir the true source today. We began our epic trek at Sarhad and followed the Oxus up to Lake Chakmateen, then up into the glacial valley of the Wajir. This magnificent river begins at the roof of the world. It flows for over 2,500 kilometers. I followed in the footsteps of some of the most formidable explorers in history to solve the mystery of this ancient waterway.
After all this time and all this debate, the source really isn't the issue. What the issue is the amazing civilizations that this river has given birth to.
For thousands of years, the Oxus has carried people and ideas through Central Asia and onwards to both the east and the west. I feel I've come a step closer to understanding Alexander's grueling campaign through these mountain passes. Over 2,300 years ago, he laid claim to the pathways that lead back to our earliest beginnings. This matchless landscape is all but deserted today. What remains are the mountain refuges and memorials to the lives claimed along the way. It's the end of my 6-month journey. I began, as Alexander did, in Greece, and I've travelled almost 7,000 kilometres to the eastern borders of Afghanistan. Alexander would fail in his final conquest. Unlike the victorious god Dionysus, the vastness of India defeated him. Over time, much of the world he conquered has been lost to climate change and war. But today, intriguing traces of ruined fortresses and age-old temples still survive. Evidence of the spectacular cities and trading posts that flourished along the River Oxus in the Bronze Age. Alexander's achievements made him a legend. But his greatest legacy is his discovery of the extraordinary civilization that once thrived in this forsaken land. It formed a decisive part of our history and shaped the world we know today.